this is just one of those areas where the federal government is just making changes incrementally.
Tonight, just a small percentage of federal workers have cultural sensitivity training.
The revitalization part of the dogs, we've started that.
Plus, they're bringing back the slaughtered Baffin Island sled dogs, but there's lots more that needs to be done.
What evidence supported the government's view that there was a threat to security?
And questions about the use of the Emergency Measures Act hit Parliament Hill. Good evening, Tanse, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. A remote First Nation in the Yukon is breathing a sigh of relief after a convicted sex offender was almost released into their community last weekend. While the First Nation has taken action to protect community members, they say their wishes on the reintegration of the offender were ignored. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
The Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation says it's in disbelief after a violent sexual offender was set to be released to their community last weekend. 45-year-old Christopher Schaefer has a lengthy criminal record and a history of sexual assault. On Friday, a justice of the peace ordered he be returned on bail to his remote home community of Old Crow, a decision that blindsided the First Nation.
This is nothing short of dangerous. Even if there is no physical violence that would come from this individual being launched into our community, people will be hurt, and they already are. I know this.
Chief Danatija Tram says this prompted the First Nation to declare an emergency order banning Schaefer from settlement lands. The order will remain in effect for 90 days. According to Tija Tram, there has been discussions on reintegrating Schaefer, but the community needs to be involved in those decisions.
Someone just needed to reach out to us. All they had to do was ask, and we would be there in full force to assist.
A new residency plan is being worked out for Schaefer. The Vuntut Gwitchin say they also want a public inquiry. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
And some late-breaking news on this. A Yukon territorial court judge has ordered Schaefer to be released in Whitehorse. APTN reached out to Schaefer's lawyer but did not hear back by airtime. Canada officially recognized the second National Day for Truth and Reconciliation last month, and this meant all federal employees had the day off from work. But new numbers show only a small minority of civil servants have taken any Indigenous sensitivity training. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
About 18% of nearly 320,000. That's the number of federal employees who have taken any one of 3 Indigenous sensitivity courses offered by the public service. The NDP asked for the numbers recently, and MP Laurie Idlout says they are disappointing but not surprising, since the training is not a job requirement.
One of the terms that I've unfortunately had to say whenever it comes to Indigenous issues is that we're forced to experience incremental justice. And this is just one of those areas where the federal government is just making changes incrementally.
Educating public servants on Indigenous history and colonialism is one of the TRC's calls to action. Public Service Alliance Canada President Chris Aylward says the union wanted to make such training a mandatory part of the collective agreement, but was told no by the federal government.
And we were just outright refused by Treasury Board. They said no. And the reason, the rationale for saying no was that this is already happening. And as you just pointed out, yes, it's happening. It's happening off the side of somebody's desk. And we got, 16% of the entire federal public sector workforce attending these sessions. That's simply not good enough.
But Brendan Gunn of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation says the government needs to look beyond just making Indigenous sensitivity training mandatory.
It can also be included, though, especially in senior levels, in performance evaluations, right? So as part of people's jobs, are they recognizing that they need to have this basic competency as part of delivering Canada's broader services and policy objectives towards reconciliation?
In an emailed statement, Treasury Board told APTN it is up to each individual government department whether or not Indigenous sensitivity training is a job requirement. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A public commission into the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act this past winter gets underway in Ottawa on Thursday. The act was invoked by the government in February, largely in response to the Freedom Convoy protests that had taken over downtown streets in the nation's capital for weeks. The commission will hear from a total of 65 witnesses, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. At a press conference on Wednesday, Cara Zwiebel of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association said the commission has a number of important questions to answer.
Was the legal threshold for invoking the Act met? Were there genuine concerns about threats to national security, or was the government largely concerned about the economic impacts of the blockades? What evidence supported the government's view that there was a threat to security or a serious threat to the lives, health, or safety of Canadians? Why, according to the government, were existing laws inadequate to address the emergency?
Disappointed, dismayed, and dictatorship. Those are the words used by the Interlake Reserve's Tribal Council as they responded to the Manitoba government's recent plan to address flood recovery in Lake St. Martin. The Interlake Reserve's Tribal Council represents communities affected by widespread flooding in the area. They say a provincial plan to construct 2 channels between Lakes Winnipeg, St. Martin, and Lake Manitoba will impact culturally significant sites, including a traditional burial ground, fishing site, and a sturgeon spawning area. The council is responding to a recent announcement by the Manitoba government of $15.9 million to support Indigenous economic development for communities. Brian Swan is a councillor at Lake Manitoba First Nation.
We figured we had an open transparency that we were going to be part of this $500 million project, and to realize they're giving us table scraps now, and now it's proposal driven, $15.9 million to be divided between 39 communities. We have, if you broke that up and distributed that evenly between each band, that's less than $400,000. And anybody knows on a First Nation, to get a house, to get a 4-bedroom house, for example, in a First Nation, costs you $380,000.
An inquest into the deaths of 2 Anishinaabe men who died in Thunder Bay City Police custody is underway this week. The inquest is examining how racism, bias, and stereotyping by police and paramedics may have been a factor in the deaths of Donald Mamakwa and Roland McKay. Asha James is a partner at Falconer's LLP law firm and is representing the families at the inquest, and she joins us from Thunder Bay. Asha, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day. I know you probably just got right out of court, so we really do appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me today.
So this is an inquest into the 2014 death of Don Mamakwa and the 2017 death of Marlon Roland McKay. Why is this a joint inquest?
It's a joint inquest because both men died while in police custody in the Thunder Bay cells. So there's similarities there. There's similarities in terms of the issues that arise in this inquest, whether or not racism was a factor in the treatment that they received, and then that they have a relation in the sense that Roland is actually Don's uncle. And so I think with all of those factors, it made sense to hold both of the inquests together.
Now, you're representing the families of the deceased, some of whom spoke at the inquest on Tuesday. Can you tell us what they're hoping for from this inquest?
I mean, I think ultimately, and they said it in their evidence, is just don't want to see anybody else die like this in police custody. And so we're hoping to get some recommendations to, one, obviously address the circumstances around the death, but also to address some of the root causes that created the circumstances for both Don and Roland, being able to access health services, what health services are available in communities, why you have to leave your community to come to big cities, Thunder Bay, Sioux Lookout to access medical services, and what supports are needed to assist in navigating those systems.
And on that note, what are some of the potential outcomes from this coroner's inquest?
Well, the jury is essentially there to really answer 5 questions. Who the deceased was, when they died, how they came to their death, by what means, but also really to provide some recommendations. And I think that we're hopeful that we're on kind of a precipice here in Thunder Bay where people are really calling for real systemic change to happen within a lot of these institutions. And so we're hopeful that those types of recommendations will be made, and that the institutions, agencies, organizations that the recommendations are made to are willing to really make the necessary changes if they are committed to truth and reconciliation.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, but we will certainly be watching how this unfolds. And we really appreciate your time here. I know you're very busy, so again, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right, it's time for a short break, but still to come, Baffin Island Inuit get more federal money to move reconciliation forward.
We received $20 million before, so we've already started to implement some of those recommendations.
Welcome back. In 2000, Baffin Island Inuit set out to show what happened to Inuit sled dogs between 1950 and the mid-1970s. That expanded to an entire Truth Commission to show the entire history of the era. 25 recommendations were made in 2011, and now the people behind the Truth Commission have millions more to see those recommendations through. Kent Driscoll has that story for us tonight.
It started out about the dog teams, but it didn't stay that way for long. The Kikitani Truth Commission was launched in 2000, and the goal was to see if RCMP were responsible for a slaughter of dog teams between the 1950s and the late 70s. The loss of those dogs forced Inuit off the land and into communities. It didn't take them long to realize that the entire story was bigger than just the dogs. The scope expanded to show the historic conditions for Baffin Island Inuit at that time. In 2011, they developed 25 recommendations and received $20 million in federal funding to implement them.
Earlier, we received $20 million before, so we've already started to implement some of those recommendations, but certainly we'll do our very best to ensure that we do our best to implement most of the recommendation within the next few years, I guess.
And that's why Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller zoomed into this QIA meeting to provide another $25 million to implement the 25 recommendations of the Truth Commission. Some of the recommendations are done. This is a look at the monument the RCMP put up for Inuit Special Constables just last year, following the report. Others, like attempting to revitalize dog sledding on Baffin Island, are partly complete.
The revitalization part of the dogs, we've started that with having the dog owners to come here and talk about what and how they could improve having more dogs in the future and how we could use them in hunting.
Some of the recommendations are easy to track. It was pretty easy to see when the RCMP built their Special Constable monument. Others, one calls for the government of Nunavut to operate following the Nunavut land claim. The government would say they are already. Other land claim partners would disagree. Another example? One recommendation is for an Inuit History Month to be declared. That still hasn't happened. This additional $25 million could get a few recommendations crossed off the list. Now QIA has to make sure it happens. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
An Inuit Carver north of 60 is hoping to quite literally set traditional knowledge in stone. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings you this story about the seasons of the moon.
Him and I had a lot of resilience throughout the years.
Inuit are known for storytelling, and Angus Cockney is no exception. The respected Inuvialuit carver from Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories, is wowing audiences with his new collection, Ata Sunaluna, meaning listen what moon.
This was the very first moon that I created. Somehow I felt compelled to do this one. I just saw a piece of stone that spoke to me.
Cockney honors generations before him by interpreting Inuvialuit stories of the 12 moons. It's no easy feat, translating and preserving oral history. For instance,
how was I to properly represent the whiteness and the shininess of the snow in April, when the snow and the sun sparkles?
But it's a personal responsibility. The stories have been handed down from his great-great-grandfather to his grandfather, Nalogak, to himself.
When I came across my grandfather's book, I Nalogak, a book that was published in '64, and it's a wonderful account of his life and times as a Inuvialuit living in the Mackenzie Delta. So it took a while to put those stories in stones, the legends and whatever he's talking about. And the last while or so, I finally felt that I had the maturity to honor those stories, because I finally gained experience and confidence throughout the years. That took the longest.
Cockney hopes audiences learn about Inuvialuit culture and their resiliency. He himself attended residential school at age 5. When he left, he went on to become a 3-time national champion in cross-country skiing.
Yeah, Gloria Hall was established in 1959, and I got there in '62, so it was in its heyday. So there's 13 years of that experience. Life is not how you make it, it's how you take it. And for me in residential school, you know, I could have taken the path of a victim, but I took the path of a victor. That's the path I chose. Well, you know, this is my grandfather in Oligak, and, you know, based on his story and mine, I think we have a lot in common. Because in 1909, he says, man, people are starting to lose that knowledge. I better write it down. So I've taken that one step further and set all those stories in stone. So now it's forever.
Cockney is kicking off the launch in the north at the Prince of Wales Museum in Yellowknife. He's traveled with one moon so far, but hopes to have the whole collection exhibited in museums in the future. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
All right, it's time for one final break, but still ahead, highlights from today's In Focus looking at salmon numbers in BC and the Yukon.
Salmon to us is everything. Salmon is life. They have given their lives for us for thousands of years.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Dave Menzies was at a boat launch near Selkirk, Manitoba along the Red River this past Sunday, and this was the busy scene as fishers were headed out to enjoy the day as the sun was breaking over the horizon. It's a great shot there, Dave. Thanks for that. If you have a great photo, be sure to email that photo to share@aptn.ca, and it might just be featured during our national newscast. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting over in the east, 20 in Charlottetown and 20 in Halifax. 5 degrees in Happy Valley Goose Bay and 4 degrees in Cartwright. 21 degrees in Quebec City and 21 in Montreal. Some showers in 16 in Toronto and 14 in North Bay. Showers in 15 in Wawa and 6 in showers in Big Trout Lake. 6 and some rain in Churchill and 2 degrees in Thompson. 7 degrees in Winnipeg and 10 and clear in Brandon. 9 degrees in Yorkton, and 14 in North Battleford. 11 degrees in Buffalo Narrows, and 4 degrees in Stony Rapids. Moving west, 9 degrees in Fort Chippewa and 18 in Peace River. 22 and clear in Edmonton, and 21 and clear in Calgary. Sunshine and 22 in Campbell River, and 19 in Bella Coola. 15 in Smithers, and 14 in Dease Lake. -2 in Beaver Creek, and -7 in Old Crow. -1 in Norman Wells, and 16 in Fort Simpson. -2 in Inuvik, and 0 degrees in Colville Lake. -7 in Cambridge Bay, and 6 in Chesterfield. -6 in Resolute, and -3 in Iqaluit. The future of salmon in British Columbia and the Yukon was in focus today. Numbers have been on a decline for a while now, and we spoke to experts on how important salmon is to First Nations communities. Here's some highlights from our show.
Salmon to us is everything. Salmon is life. They have given their lives for us for thousands of years, and now we're at a declining numbers every year, and we don't have fish camps, so that connection with salmon is being lost. So we don't have fish camps anymore, not in our traditional territory, and most of the Yukon hasn't been fishing for the last 20 years in some cases, and most recently some of our other communities have not been fishing for the last couple of years just because the numbers are so low. And with them not being here, that takes away more than just the salmon. It's a way of life. It's activities at fish camp, sharing of stories, listening to our elders, and having that connection with the river, with the land, with our elders, with our ancestors. So when we lose that, we lose a lot of our culture.
We go years, and it's sad to say, but decades without our traditional foods. You can see in the back here, I've got a couple cases of sockeye this year. I've got 4. It's the first time in 2 decades that I've been able to say that I have salmon in the cupboard for the winter. And yet this is such a fundamental food source for 90% of the First Nations in BC. And when we see government continually make very poor decisions in terms of protection of salmon and actually supporting an industry like the open net cage fish farms, which have a direct impact on our food security, this has been a great issue that's been a large amount of focus. And it's only until recently that we've had a government that is willing to step up and make a transition of fish farms from the oceans of British Columbia.
Is it different this time? Like, is there, does it feel different, or is it sort of similar to previous years when some of the salmon numbers have been in decline?
I think this is different this year, Daryl. One of the things that I remember asking, what was her name? I asking one of the scientists, Alexandra Morton, about the fish farm situation. I asked her the question of what happens if these fish farms aren't removed from BC waters? What is the outlook for salmon? And the word she said to me was extinction. And my jaw kind of dropped when she said that, because I realized that salmon really are at risk out here right now. So when I see the language from DFO, they're talking about basically restoring salmon stocks, and they're not really mincing their words. They're saying salmon has been in decline for multiple years.
That's all we have for you tonight. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, thank you for joining us. Miigwech. Have a great night.